Hello there everybody, welcome back to my channel, Boomy Reactions. For those of you who are new, my name's Boomy and thank you for watching my lovelies. Now today guys, we're going to be watching a video that is titled The Unluckiest Disasters in History. Now, the name of this got me thinking, so what are we constituting as an unlucky disaster? I'm going to say, I think this assumes that there is no one at fault. It just happens to be rotten luck. That could be the weather. Natural disasters, I will say they definitely factor into very unfortunate and very unlucky. But if it's things that are more down to, incompetence is a strong word, I'm going to say incompetence. If it comes down to incompetence of, human error or greed, trying to cut corners and save costs and things like that, then I'm going to say that is an avoidable disaster. So I wouldn't really factor that as an unlucky. Like, okay, for example, like the sinking of the Titanic. At first, you could say it's very unlucky that it hit an iceberg and rotten luck. I don't think luck played that much of a factor in that. So I wouldn't refer to that as an unlucky disaster. I would say that's cutting costs. We won't go into that conspiracy theory. That's a whole other can of worms. This is just an example. So yeah, if it's down to human error, I'm going to be strict on this video and I'm going to say, I don't think that's bad luck. However, let's see which disasters this video is referring to. Yeah, got an angry looking cloud there. I'm going to say a lot of them probably rotate around the weather or just happening to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Just maybe a chain series of events that just leads to a very, very unfortunate, horrible disaster. Let's watch and we'll find out, shall we? And guys, if you're enjoying these reactions, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much, my lovelies. If you're interested, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account. That link is over here. And if you would like to help support my channel any further, I have a Patreon account. Oh, yes, I do. And if you fancy checking that out at all, that link is in the description below there.
The unluckiest disasters in history.
Okay. Oh. Okay, animal intervention will constitute as unlucky. Okay. So it's not the Titanic, but we have got the sinking of the RMS Empress of Ireland. Now, I can't say I know about this, so okay. Tell me all about it.
You ever have one of those awkward encounters in a grocery aisle where you face off against a stranger coming at you in a clash of cards? You gotta make a split decision on which way you're gonna go. You go one way, they go the same, so you switch it up, but they also switch it up, and it's just like, come on, man, pick a freaking side. You almost immediately remedy the situation and go about your ways, exchanging a glanceless slight chuckle or a death stare depending on your personality type.
If it's in the UK, it's always like a really awkward floundering. It's like, sorry, sorry.
But imagine this same situation with two giant fucking ships and zero visibility. That's exactly what happened with this ship, the RMS Empress of Ireland. The Empress was a British-built transatlantic ocean liner owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway. She was tasked with carting immigrants and cargo across the ocean between Great Britain and Canada.
Yes.
Across her 8 years of voyages, the Empress and her crew successfully completed 95 skips across the pond, bringing about 119,000 rascals westward to the Great White North and sending about 68,000 over the horizon.
Fairly successful. Yeah, okay. Done this plenty of times. Okay.
But voyage number 96 proved to be the liner's last.
Oh, no.
Carrying nearly 1,500 passengers and crew, including newly promoted Captain Henry George Kendall on his very first voyage commanding her, the Empress of Ireland departed from Quebec City in the late afternoon on May 28, 1914, heading down the St. Lawrence River, where she would then sail into the Atlantic towards Liverpool in the UK.
What is it with this year and the sinking of ships? This is the same year as the Titanic, isn't it? Oh.
Just before 2 a.m. the next morning, the Empress of Ireland had approached the mouth of the river, heading for open ocean. The crew had observed the lights of an incoming ship, the Norwegian SS Storstad. The Storstad was a cargo ship, structurally reinforced to be able to cut through icy waters while bearing immense cargo loads. On this venture, the Storstad was hauling roughly 10,000 tons of coal. Although dark, the weather was perfectly clear, allowing each ship to spot the other a few miles off of their respective starboard sides. At their current headings, each ship looked like they would safely pass each other with a few miles of buffer. No problem. But then, of course, there was a problem. A thick-ass fog rolled in right as both ships approached. Neither ship could see the other, so they had to resort to using their foghorns to communicate their actions.
Right.
The Empress sounded 3 short blasts. Being cautious, Captain Kendall ordered the Empress full astern, meaning that the engines would be thrown in reverse to slow the ship down to a gradual stop until the fog had lifted and both ships could safely pass unobstructed.
Now that sounds sensible. Okay.
The assumption here was that the opposing vessel, the Storstad, would hear the Empress's plan to stop and wait out the fog and hopefully do the same. No such luck. By 1:50 in the morning, the Empress was reportedly at a full stop, drifting only by the currents of the river. Then came the response from the Storstad. A single prolonged blast indicating that it was still traveling, but this blast was loud, much louder than it should have been. Within seconds of the response, the Storstad appeared out of the fog, bearing down on the Empress. Oh, shit. Captain Kendall testified that the Storstad was no more than 100 feet away by the time he was able to see the ship. And by that time, a collision was inevitable. Kendall reportedly ordered the Empress hard to starboard and engines full ahead as to minimize the impact and hopefully make it a glancing blow. But there simply wasn't enough time to pick up any speed. At 1:55 a.m., the two ships collided with a deafening impact. The damage reached as far as 25 feet into the heart of the Empress, instantly killing several second and third class passengers as they slept, as well as several crew. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Kendall quickly called out to the opposing crew to remain full ahead as to keep the ships together, hoping that the ship's stern would keep the Empress's hull plugged while they evacuated the survivors. However, the Storstad was already commanded full astern before the impact to try to minimize the momentum of the collision. Paired with the strength of the river's current, the two ships were separated within seconds and the Empress's hull began to flood. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Despite attempts to prolong the sinking through the closure of watertight doors, the ocean liner sank in just 14 minutes flat, taking with it the souls of over 1,000 passengers and crew. Although its bow took a hell of a beating, the Storstad remained afloat and deployed lifeboats, rescuing roughly 200 from the frigid waters. After extensive investigations with both sides giving conflicting stories, blame was mostly put on the Storstad as it had deviated from its original heading after the fog had rolled in, reportedly due to a misinterpretation of the actions of the Empress. According to their testimony, the crew of the Storstad believed that the Empress was turning towards them as to pass port to port rather than the original starboard to starboard. Does
that make sense? So, okay, I would say this is unlucky because I think it's a massive misunderstanding. It doesn't really appear that anyone's competence is called into question here. I suppose it'd come down to which one of the captains was deviating from what should have been done. What would have been the normal protocol at this time in history? You know, what should they have done? Because I imagine it's what the RMS Island, I forget what it's called, slowing down, coming to a standstill. If they hadn't have stopped, would that have made the collision worse? I don't know.
This explains the Storstad's bizarre decision to turn starboard right into the Empress's path, ultimately leading to the collision. To add insult to injury, the fog that started the whole debacle had lifted just a few minutes after impact. Could have just waited it out.
Oh, there's nothing worse than looking back in hindsight and knowing things like that. If both would have waited, the fog would have cleared. Oh,
If there was ever a prime example of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, it would be at Lake Nyos in Cameroon, Africa on August 21st, 1986. That explosion right there was a limnic eruption, also called a lake overturn. Let's take a look at what that really means. Towards the bottom of Lake Nyos is a high concentration of carbon dioxide being farted out from heavy volcanic activity deep below the lake bed. With depths reaching as far as 680 feet down, the substantial pressure at the bottom of the lake dissolves the majority of the released CO2 into the surrounding water. This creates a gradient along the depth of the lake, with deeper waters being rich in carbon dioxide and surface waters being more rich in oxygen. It's a very delicate equilibrium which, if thrown off balance, can have catastrophic results. And as you can imagine, this is exactly what happened. Now, scientists haven't exactly agreed on what kickstarted this chain of events. Prevailing theories have ranged from earthquakes to landslides to even
Volcanic
really no
eruptions.
outside influence whatsoever. But what is known is that the entire system was momentarily disrupted, causing a massive volume of CO2 enriched water to rise to the higher, less pressurized zones of the lake. With less pressure, enormous volumes of the dissolved CO2 effervesced out of the water in a runaway reaction. And there
Literally in what might look like an underwater fart.
Here's the word of the day for you.
bottom
Effervescence.
verb.
No, it's not that Bring Me to Life band. It's when dissolved gas rapidly escapes out of a liquid solution, usually by a catalytic pressure differential. You know, like when you pop open a soda bottle and you see all the bubbles start fizzing?
Yes.
That's effervescence. Basically, the same thing was happening here, except with the case of Lake Nyos, it was magnitudes worse. At 9:30 at night on August 21st, 1986, it's estimated that as much as 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide, along with various volcanic gases like sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, erupted from the depths of Lake Nyos. The sudden extreme displacement of water caused the level of the lake to drop by about 4 feet, and the force of the explosion completely leveled the trees in the surrounding area.
What? Leveled trees. So this was an explosion. I did not think, I grossly misunderstood and underestimated what the impact of that would have been. Leveled trees. Are you serious? That's horrible.
Now escaped dense gas quickly formed a thick fog that crept along the surface of the water and spilled down the hillside. Unluckily, of course, right towards populated villages. The fog reportedly swept across the landscape with speeds upwards of 30 miles an hour. It was an unstoppable beast.
Is it a harmless fog, or what happened to the like the volcanic kind of gases? Is it sulfur dioxide? And it's not like a corrosive, the right word? Not like a harmful gas in this fog or anything, no?
The first village in its path was Lower Nyos. As the cloud consumed the village, residents lost consciousness within seconds. Many were suffocated in their sleep, while others collapsed where they stood before any sense of what was even happening.
Okay.
What am I? Dead?
That's dark.
Within minutes, Lower Nyos suffered a catastrophic 98% fatality rate. Of approximately 1,200 villagers, only a handful survived simply because they were on slightly higher ground. Guys? Next to be engulfed.
Is the fog, is it like a dense fog? So it's kind of creeping, it's weighed down. I don't know the scientific terms. You have to excuse me, guys. So it's quite a dense and heavy fog. So it's kind of creeping along the ground. So if you're slightly higher up, you know what I mean?
Was Subam,
that
which
anything to do
suffered
with
a 50% fatality rate, followed by the 45% fatality rate in the village of Cha. The gas cloud had reached as far as 15
Dissipates.
miles from the lake before dissipating. In its wake, it left the bodies of not only 1,700 villagers, but 3,500 livestock, as well as countless birds and insects.
So even the birds didn't have time to
The
react to
entire
this.
region was cast into an eerie silence, Where you would usually hear the chirps and chitters of nature, now there was nothing. Any survivors stood amidst an inexplicable sea of death, unable to do anything about it. Since the disaster, preventative measures have been put in place to avoid history repeating itself. In 2001, a permanent degassing pipe was installed, allowing a controlled release of CO2 from the bed of the lake to the surface, with 2 additional pipes being installed in 2011. As of 2019, it's been determined that the degassing process is in steady state and successfully self-sustaining, requiring no external power, meaning that it can continue on in perpetuity under current conditions. At least there's some good news of this story.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. When they started talking about this disaster, I thought it sounded like just like a lake fart. I did not expect that to have resulted in an explosion and then a deadly fog. Oh, that's horrendous. Now that one is, I mean, I know it's a natural phenomena that happens on a cycle, but I would say that's unlucky. No one's at fault there. You can't predict it, but I mean, could they have predicted it? No. Oh, horrible. Halifax explosion.
The morning of December 6th, 1917 marks one of the worst disasters in Canadian history.
It's Canada's
just
Halifax.
Slightly ahead of the Canucks losing the Stanley Cup to the Bruins in 2011. 2 vessels cruised along the Halifax harbor in Nova Scotia, Canada. On one side, you had the SS Emo, a Norwegian merchant steamship tasked with transporting relief supplies to Belgium amidst the events of World War I. Schwanging on over to the other side, you have the SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo steamship tasked with carrying about 3,000 tons of war explosives. The captain of the Mont Blanc, commanding basically a giant floating bomb, was eager for things to go nice and smooth. Sit back, chill, admire the sights of a nice and unexploded city. The captain of the Emo, however, was feeling rather impatient that day. He and his crew just spent several days in the harbor waiting on delayed supplies and wanted to get underway. In doing so, the captain ignored the shipping channel's etiquette and protocol, zooming towards the harbor above the posted speed limit of 5 knots or just about 6 miles an hour.
Right. This one might come down to incompetence.
Yeah, it was a real speed demon, that one. Being in such a hurry, the impatient Norwegian butthole propelled himself right in the path of a small vessel entering the harbor. He was able to dodge the dinghy, only to immediately counter a second, larger vessel, which forced the captain to dip out of the way towards the opposite side of the harbor. Coincidentally entering that same side of the harbor was the SS Mont Blanc. But this was one Emo that just wouldn't be cutting across a third time. Oh, get out the fucking way, God! The 2 ships were set to collide, and both crews frantically demanded the other to move aside.
He's an angry elf.
With no time to spare, both ships halted their engines, and the Mont Blanc turned port side to avoid impact. But at the same moment, the Emo slammed its engines in reverse, causing the bow of the ship to drift starboard, ramming its tip right into the delicate Mont Blanc. The 2 ships hit at a very low speed, just over 1 mile an hour, so the resulting damage was, momentarily, very minimal. That's all well and good, but remember that the Mont Blanc was carrying a shit ton of explosive material, and a percentage of that material was hundreds of drums of benzol, a highly flammable fuel. Several drums were dislodged in the collision and ruptured, spilling onto the deck. The wonderful thing about flammable materials is that they're completely harmless unless there's an ignition source. You know, like a spark of some kind.
Which came from the impact. Oh!
Yeah, like those.
Oh no!
As the ships began to drift apart, some metal-on-metal friction did exactly what you'd expect. Sparks flew and landed on the puddles of fuel. The crew aboard the Mont Blanc knew what was about to happen and quickly abandoned ship, frantically swimming to shore and warning any nearby residents to run for their freaking lives. But if you know anything about humans, it's that we're often drawn to catastrophe. I want to touch it. If you see some shit going down and you feel that you're out of harm's way, you're going to be cracking open a beer with the boys and watching it all unfold. C'est un beau fou. The real kicker here, though, is that none of these people were out of harm's way, as they would soon find out. The blazing Mont Blanc ominously drifted towards the shores of the town of Halifax. At 9:04 a.m., all hell broke loose.
Oh my gosh.
the hull of the Mont Blanc blew its load, creating the largest human-made explosion in history up to that point.
Really? Oh my gosh. At that time of the morning as well, if it happened in the dead of night, it might have maybe that there might have been less victims around, less people, but that's morning time. That's, let's get stuff done time, isn't it?
Everything within a 1.5 mile radius was instantly Exodia obliterated. Large heaps of burning shrapnel tore through the surrounding area, whole buildings were completely deleted, a tsunami ripped ships from the water and tossed them about like toys. In the initial blast, as many as 1,600 people were simply erased from existence. For those outside of the immediate death zone, the shockwave of the explosion rattled homes, with onlookers finding themselves blinded by shards of glass from their shattered windows. Stoves and oil lamps were toppled, igniting thousands of fires throughout the city and trapping residents within their homes. The blast was felt as far as 129 miles away. After the dust had settled, rescue efforts were immediate. Anyone that was able to swarmed in to help, pulling survivors from rubble or transporting the injured to any unaffected hospitals. Military and merchant ships were sent in and quickly converted to serve as makeshift medical clinics. Fire brigades from across the region arrived to put out whatever fires they could. Surviving trains on nearby rails were used to evacuate survivors to outer hospitals as the local ones quickly became overwhelmed. Keep in mind that this was during the height of World War I, so there were many initial worries of this being an enemy attack. These worries, along with rumors of a possible second explosion, halted some rescue attempts for several hours until it was clear that this was just a freak accident. Thankfully, the rescue efforts were proving successful, but things only got worse. The following day, a strong blizzard struck Halifax, blanketing the city in 16 inches of snow and completely cutting it off from the outside world. The pounding and blinding snow forced rescuers to stop their searches. According to Nova Scotia archives, there were 1,782 confirmed victims, including about 100 from the neighboring city of Dartmouth just across the river. As I said, roughly 1,600 people were killed instantly, with an additional 9,000 injured. In total, over 1,600 homes were destroyed, with 12,000 damaged. 31,000 survivors were left homeless or with insufficient shelter. In one fell swoop, nearly the entirety of the city's industrial sector was wiped from the map. Despite some initial arrests and intense investigative proceedings, there was not a single conviction nor party held responsible for the accident. Survivor remains continued to be sporadically discovered as late as summer of 1919, nearly 2 years after the explosion.
That just kept getting worse and worse, didn't it? Oh, I didn't even think about that. So it's like it's an industrial part of this region, and that's taken a blow with the explosion. 1,600 people killed immediately. Oh my gosh. And then the storm. And the fact that this happened, like the narrator said, at the height of World War I. So there's confusion. Nobody knows if this has been an attack from overseas. Oh my God. Oh.
All right, let's disembark from boats for a bit and head on over to trains. Trains are pretty neat. Remember those commercials from the early 2000s? Those were fun. Not as good as some of the commercials you'd randomly wake up to at 2 a.m., but that's another story. This particular chapter in history revolves around the Versailles Left Bank Railroad on May 8, 1842. Having just enjoyed a French day of French festivities, upwards of 700 French fellas and fellettes boarded a French train bound for French Paris. The train was long, about 195 standard baguettes in length. In total,
Why would you measure the train in baguettes?
18 passenger carriages were being hauled along the railway by 2 powerful steam engines. The train chugga-chugga-choo-chooed along the line at about 25 miles an hour, passing through the towns on its way to Paris. But as the engines roared through the commune of Meudon, many passengers were about to face the harsh reality of mechanical failure and metal fatigue. An axle on the front locomotive suddenly snapped, completely derailing the engine. The second engine, still under power itself, slammed into the first in a concussive blast, jumping the track and spilling the contents of both engines' fireboxes. Hundreds of pounds of burning coals were now thrown about. All of that forward momentum pulled up to 5 of the preceding passenger cars straight into the wreck. The pileup of the very wooden carriages instantly ignited from the spilled burning coals, ruptured grease boxes, and various leaking oils. To make matters worse, the passenger cars were reportedly recently painted, only further accelerating the burn. Those who weren't insta-killed by the impact were now caught in the blaze. You see, in order to prevent passengers from falling out of moving trains or attempting to jump out of a car before coming to a complete stop, it was standard practice in the 19th century across continental Europe to lock passengers in the cars from the outside. The result of this, in this particular disaster, as you can imagine, is that most survivors were now completely trapped in the mangled mess. The lucky few who remained relatively unharmed managed to throw themselves from the busted windows onto the ground below. The scene was completely horrifying and unprecedented in railway history up to that point. There had been accidents before, yeah, but they resulted in maybe a handful of deaths at most. This was something else entirely. Passenger cars that weren't converted into easy bake ovens were evacuated by nearby onlookers who tended to survivors as best they could. By the time the situation came under control, the true scale of the tragedy really began to set in. Remains were attempted to be recovered from the burnt wreck, but they were indiscernible from one another. Reports described the scene as, quote, an agglomerated mass, a heap of flesh and bones, blackened and charred by the fire, formless, disfigured, and impossible to recognize. From the pile of the remains, only 7 bodies were able to be identified through trace dental features or skull measurements. At the risk of being demonetized, I really can't do justice to the sheer scale of the violence of this accident, so if you want to read further on eyewitness statements and the descriptions of the devastation, I've got a link in the description to a comprehensive report by French historian Anne Carroll. The level of detail she provides is just ugh. The official death count for the Versailles rail accident was just 55, but historians believe the real toll to be as high as 200 due to the fact that so many remains were simply burned beyond recognition. After the accident, investigations identified the mechanical failure of the axle and expanded the field of metal fatigue research. Since then, studies and practices have been standardized that force axle replacement after certain wear and tear milestones, significantly dropping the likelihood of a repeat event to statistically improbable. As for the practice of locking passengers in cars, it was abandoned effectively overnight following the tragedy. In France, at least. It took some convincing and compromise over the following years for the rest of Europe to follow suit. Safety design is a fickle fiend.
Okay, that is absolutely horrendous. Again, no one's really to blame there. It was what do they call it? The metal fatigue. Would anyone have known any better at the time? Probably not. But important to make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. Oh gosh, I can't get that image out of my head, being locked in those carts. Oh.
Let's end on something a little bit more lighthearted, even though it still involves a lot of death. The Erfurt latrine disaster was a disaster involving a latrine in the German city of Erfurt. Groundbreaking, I know, but trust me, the whole event is quite literally groundbreaking. Back in 1184, some political turmoil was brewing within the Holy Roman Empire. An informal meeting between 2 rude but noble dudes required the mediation by 18-year-old Henry VI. He was the king of Germany, Italy, and Sicily, and future emperor to the Holy Roman Empire as a whole. The meeting, held in the city of Erfurt, aimed to settle a multi-year-long land dispute between the two parties. Attending said meeting were imperial officials, knights, nobles, bishops, clergy, and counts. Over 100 powerful people jammed and crammed into one small room. A small room on the upper floor. Did you hear something? Nein. Oh well. The argument carried on with both parties pleading their respective cases to the king.
Your Highness, he's encroaching on my ecclesiastical jurisdiction.
Oh, go suck ein Schwinkter. You know that's not true.
They're all going to stamp their feet, aren't they? Or start jumping up and down.
Guys, can we not get into this shit? Well, what Scheiße do you recommend we get in then? I'll be right back. Smack dab in the middle of the meeting, the centuries-old wooden floor and support structure buckled under the weight of the attendees. Nearly all those present collapsed through to the ground floor. But they didn't stop there. With the sudden force of all these people slamming into it, the ground floor also collapsed, breaking through to a cesspit below. Within just seconds, dozens of people were now submerged in years' worth of fetid fecal matter.
Ew, 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 ew.
SOL. Oh god, SOL. Many were knocked unconscious from the fall and drowned in the waste, while
Oh, don't. Oh my. Can't imagine anything worse. I imagine there's a fair bit of bacteria and disease down there.
while others had suffocated under the harsh methane fumes. Some managed to be saved from the slop, but according to historical records, it's believed that at least 60 people died from the collapse and subsequent poopy plunge. Some historians do believe it may have been more, as only those of high rank were named and accounted for, so it's speculated that lower ranking or less notable figures like servants and such were simply not recorded after suffering their duty drowning. In a stroke of good luck, the king remained unharmed as he was positioned on a reinforced part of the upper floor. What?
It's totally not funny. It's just when he calls it things like the poopy plunge. What did he just call it? I missed that. The duty something.
What'd you do?
Duty.
While there were no overwhelming political consequences, it was a pretty big shock to German aristocracy for a time, eventually becoming a big brown skid mark in German history.
Oh, that's so gross. Oh, I want more. I want more silly animated disasters. Well, I don't want any more disasters, but you know, silly poo related stories. That's so horrible. Oh my gosh. That I can't actually imagine a more disgusting way of expiring. Ugh. Oh, that's so horrible. Okay. I think most of them are just really unfortunate. Like, you could probably blame infrastructure, or you could blame the failing of materials or poor design, but up until that point nobody knew any better, so that I'd still class that as unlucky and not so much incompetence. But the incident in Halifax, why was no one held accountable for that? Because the narrators even said that the chap driving the captain of the, what was the other vessel? I can't remember what the name of it was. They were going too fast. And they were drawn really angrily. So I don't know. I think that might be incompetence. The boat sea equivalent of road rage. But yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed watching. Well, not so much enjoyed, found interesting. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching along with me, guys. And take care of yourselves, and I will see you on the next video. Bye bye.